Madame.
Merci.
Okay, it is 1:45. Good morning, Excellencies, distinguished guests, dear friends, ladies and gentlemen. I will be standing for the first bit because I've just been told that at the back you can't really see the people sitting down, and since I don't have the pretension of being that tall, I will stand up so at least you know who's moderating. So thank you very much for joining us this morning for our side event on the global stocktake and ocean carbon dioxide removal. I'm Laurella Picourt, you can see it here. I'm the Executive Director of the Ocean and Climate Platform, and I have the pleasure of moderating this very important session today. So before we dive in, allow me to warmly thank our organizers as well, the Plymouth Marine Laboratory, the American Geophysical Union, the Ocean and Climate Platform, the UC San Diego and the Scripps Institution of Oceanography, and the WHOI Oceanographic Institution. So it's a very impressive panel and a very impressive list of organizers here. We're actually here to discuss what are those opportunities, uncertainties, the risks, and maybe the future needs as well of ocean CDR. And it's a very good thing that we have such outstanding scientists to guide us through this. To be quite honest, at the beginning I was a bit intimidated to be alongside all such distinguished doctors, because I'm not a doctor at all. So everyone's doctor something, and I'm Lorelei. Hi, lovely to be here. I don't know if you've been following these discussions, but I feel like since COP27 in Sharm, everyone's been freaking out, quite frankly, on many reasons, but also on ocean carbon dioxide removals. We've been talking about it everywhere here in New York. In all the discussions, people fear it, people promote it, but I think that the most important thing here is for everyone to understand the stakes, and that's the very reason why we're here today. And we have a number of colleagues that collaborated to launch last week, actually, a statement on the precautionary principle for ocean CDR research. And I encourage all of you, of course, to read it, because that's extremely helpful to understand where we're at. And while it's widely recognized that the ocean is the biggest carbon sink on the planet, we also understand that climate change and its impacts are worsening. So without any surprise, there is growing interest in leveraging the ocean's natural processes to reduce this CO2 concentration in the atmosphere and store it in the ocean. So these processes called ocean CDR, how do they work, and how are we going to scale them up if we have to? It's important here, I think, to recall also the latest Bible, the 6th assessment of the IPCC reports, that actually states that ocean CDR cannot be replaced from deep emissions reductions. And I think that's the first message here today. It's not because we have alternatives, that we have technology, that we need to find a scapegoat or a loophole to drastically reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. However, the IPCC also states that we might need this on top of emission cuts. We might need to scale up ocean CDR. So this is my brief introduction, and we have a lot of excellent people here to further discuss this, and we're also here in this context in Bonn to link this with the processes of the global stocktake and the processes of the UNFCCC as we move out of the technical dialogues and into the political phase. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to invite for opening remarks. He's the UN Secretary General, Special Envoy for the Ocean, but he's only really our Special Envoy for the Ocean, Excellency Peter Thomson.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Lorelei. Yeah, I was the one who said that you can't see anything from the back seats if we're seated, and I apologize for that, because I am going to sit down. I wrote this speech coming on the plane from Australia yesterday, and I'm going to read the damn thing having written it. But welcome to everybody here and present, and also to those beaming in. I think this is being live streamed. And as you emerge from the undersea cables, remember that if you're on the internet, all your messages are going and coming to us from under the sea. That's often forgotten. People think the internet is about satellites, but it's not. It's about the ocean. So I'm going to sit. Sorry, I apologize to those at the back, but here goes. Listen, these days the words vital and existential are much used. And at the start of this event today, I want to emphasize them both again. Why? Because they adhere firmly to the topic of our discussions, namely the opportunities, the uncertainties, the risks, and the future needs of ocean-based carbon dioxide removal. 2 points should guide our discussions this morning. The first has been clearly set out in the description of today's event, and I quote it. Quote, "The first global stocktake provides the opportunity to include the world's oceans as," and they use plural, of course it should be the world's ocean, "as a key element for nations and the global community in delivering the Paris Agreement and addressing the Glasgow Pact for better inclusion of the ocean in all relevant UNFCCC processes. Achieving warming close to 1.5 degrees by 2050 will not just require massive cuts in CO2 emissions, but also removal of CO2 from the atmosphere." That's the IPCC. So the ocean covers 2/3 of the planet's surface, and with its massive capabilities and its long-standing service of carbon storage and mitigation of anthropogenically created planetary warming, it was predictable that the world would eventually come around to ocean-based carbon dioxide removal. Let's call it OCDR. But OCDR has its risks, and therefore, again, to quote our event's introductory paper, "Understanding the ocean carbon cycle and how it might change under a changing climate, as well as understanding the feasibility, uncertainty, risks, and verification of different OCDR approaches is essential to avoid," emphasis, "unintended consequences." What OCDR techniques are acceptable to humanity? How will they be governed? And who will meet their costs? The bottom line is that we don't yet know enough about the risks and, yes, the potential benefits of OCDR. Until we do know these things, the international community is not in a position to responsibly sanction or deploy OCDR. My second point also relates to inevitability, and it too warrants a direct quote, in this case from the IPCC's special report, Global Warming of 1.5 degrees, wherein it was stated, and it was written with high confidence, that, quote, "all pathways that limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius with limited or no overshoot predict the use of carbon dioxide removal on the order of 100 to 1,000 gigatons of CO2, and that's 1 billion tons of carbon dioxide, by the way, over the 21st century. CDR would be used to compensate for residual emissions and in most cases achieve net negative emissions to return global warming to 1.5 degrees following a peak," end of quote. That IPCC report was published 5 years ago now, and I believe we've been delinquent in not sufficiently debating CDR techniques and governance issues at a multilateral level. Surely, authoritative, transparent, multilateral discussions must take place on a matter that is in every sense a universal one for the planet. If this delinquency were to continue, we may find ourselves in an invidious position when and if it becomes necessary to deploy CDR at scale in, say, 2030. I'm thus full of praise for those who convened today's gathering to foster international debate on the subject. We have an obligation to engage in full and frank research and cooperation on this subject. Thus, I look forward to the presentations by the experts who have kindly agreed to address us today. Ladies and gentlemen, you may be familiar with my daily mantra. There can be no healthy planet without a healthy ocean, and the ocean's health is currently measurably in decline. I believe that by the 2030 maturation of SDG 14, we can effectively overcome two of the main causes of that decline, namely marine pollution and harmful human activities related to the fishing industry, including overfishing, illegal fishing, harmful fishing practices, and subsidizing industrial fishing fleets. But correcting the course of ocean acidification, deoxygenation, and warming is more pernicious because of the long-term effects of the current conditions. First up, we must stop digging the hole that we've created. Make no mistake, there's one central cure for the damage being done to the ocean's health, and that is rapid reduction of anthropogenic greenhouse gases in the Earth's atmosphere. OCDR cannot be a substitute for decarbonization. We have to stop burning fossil fuels. At the same time, we have little choice but to accept the advice of the IPCC's special report and take a responsible approach to CDR. Rightly so, there's a public distrust of geoengineering, and this has meant most politicians are wary of grasping that nettle. But if we are honest with ourselves, given its anthropogenic causes, climate change itself is a form of geoengineering. Since it's unlikely any early consensus will be achieved between member states on the subject of CDR, I believe it would be helpful if an international high commission, heavily grounded in science, were to be appointed to investigate CDR techniques, research and governance options, including OCDR within EEZ's territorial seas and the high seas. And I've mentioned those three categories because you've got to think about the transboundary implications of all this. Given the advice of the IPCC special report, it's fully predictable that forms of scaled-up CDR will be deployed at some stage in the future. Whether they will be ocean-based or not remains to be seen, and this is the nub of it. We need to advance and share our knowledge of the various techniques being proposed. Some appear feasible, others look like something out of a science fiction comic book. The wheat must be separated from the chaff, but who will supervise the process of trial and error as we carry out the necessary research? Who will govern the caution required on geoengineering experiments with potentially planet-altering consequences? I hope to hear clear proposals emerging on those questions during today's discussions, and thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Peter, for your commitment, for your great ideas, and I have nothing else to say but invite our fantastic panelists to join us on stage. We have name tags, so it should be relatively easy to find where you're supposed to sit. And we will dive into our conversation. We can all sit at once. It's nicer and comfier. So we're going to listen to a number of presentations. And we'll need to discuss a little bit, what are those uncertainties and how to implement appropriate safeguards, and of course, what are the potential to also contribute to the goals of the Paris Agreement. So now that everyone has taken up their seats, I will introduce each of the speakers as they take the floor. And as the guardian of time, I will be very mean if you go beyond your allocated time, because we would like to ensure that we can take questions from the floor here, but also for the people joining us online. So to kickstart this discussion, I also have to do the slides, sorry. There we go, that's a fantastic panel to begin with. And we'll start first with Dr. Sarah Cooley, who's had the kindness of pre-recording a video, and she couldn't join us online today, but Sarah is the Director of Climate Science at Ocean Conservancy, as well as the coordinating lead author on Working Group 2 on Impacts, Adaptation and Vulnerability for the IPCC 6 assessment reports. And quite frankly, Sarah has been a little bit of our translator this last few months about all these techniques on ocean CDR, and really spearheaded this collaboration among scientists and NGOs to come up with the statement on precautionary principle for OCDR research. So we are very lucky to have her explanation coming to us here in Bonn, and to tell us a little bit more about where we stand in terms of OCDR research and what are the knowledge gaps and so on and so forth. So I will hope and cross my fingers for this to work.
Thank you for inviting me to speak. I'm Sarah Cooley, Director of Climate Science at Ocean Conservancy. Today I'll talk about the ocean carbon cycle, the state of ocean carbon dioxide removal research, the primary concerns people are expressing about the topic, and how a research code of conduct could help. Virtually all future climate scenarios that hold planetary warming close to 1.5 degrees Celsius by 2050 will require massive cuts in greenhouse gas emissions, supplemented by the use of carbon dioxide removal, or CDR, to remove leftover heat-trapping carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. The ocean has helped modulate some amount of planetary warming by taking up approximately 26% of all atmospheric anthropogenic carbon dioxide, or CO2. But ocean uptake of anthropogenic CO2 also causes ocean acidification. Many people are interested in whether we can deliberately increase the ocean's uptake of carbon dioxide using ocean or marine CDR, using methods that mimic natural geological or biological processes that don't worsen ocean acidification and that have neutral or positive outcomes for ecosystems and society. The goal of CDR is to take significant amounts of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and store it for long periods of time. There's a near universal agreement among researchers and climate policy experts that CDR research and development must not allow half-hearted greenhouse gas emissions reduction. For CDR to make a difference in Earth's climate, any removal needs to be in addition or above and beyond what natural processes do on their own. But at this time, there's a huge difference in the scale of the carbon dioxide emissions we are emitting and what CDR activities can be confirmed to recapture. Ocean CDR research is multiplying in industry, universities, and government labs around the world. We don't know yet whether any ocean CDR approaches can be scaled up to provide effective, safe, and durable, guaranteed removal of atmospheric carbon dioxide with neutral or positive environmental or social outcomes. Many ocean CDR approaches, like cultivation of biomass or macroalgae, enhanced mineral weathering, ocean alkalinity enhancement, or iron fertilization, have only been tested in the laboratory, in situ at small scales, or in computer models. But what we know is not sufficient to confirm that any of these methods is environmentally and socially safe for deployment at scale in the marine environment and able to remove large amounts of carbon dioxide. Other low-regret carbon removal actions are known to pose few risks and offer us numerous non-carbon cycle benefits. These generally include conservation and restoration of specific marine ecosystems and species. Questions remain especially about how much the carbon storage of these can be enhanced and how durable the removal is. There's a strong need for interdisciplinary research to explore ocean CDR approaches more thoroughly. There are many studies testing carbon removal and cost of different approaches, but fewer that examine the effects of different approaches on the surrounding environment and society. Recently, my colleagues and I analyzed the interest groups involved in ocean CDR and what their primary concerns and needs are. We found that there are three major interest groups involved in ocean CDR: information creators, funders, and information users. Information creators include researchers with all sorts of institutional affiliations and research networks. Funders include private industry, philanthropy, and government agencies. Information users include civil society organizations, nonprofits, policymakers, resource managers, and community leaders. The report contains a lot more details, but briefly, there's low trust among groups right now, and coordination is limited. There are real challenges to verifying carbon removed by most ocean approaches. There are also genuine questions about liability for research and related activities. Some concerns we identified can be partially resolved by development and implementation of a research code of conduct. Research codes of conduct are used in research areas that have uncertain implications for human or environmental welfare. These often require researchers to assess and minimize potential harms before, during, and after experiments, and use of tiered or iterative research approaches that require small-scale proof of efficacy before moving to larger scales. Research codes of conduct help ensure coordination, transparency, and equity of research, and this will go a long way to alleviating many of the concerns around ocean CDR now. Several approach-specific codes of conduct are emerging, and the American Geophysical Union has also developed a general code for climate interventions. There are still unanswered questions about whether a code should be voluntary or mandatory, how it could be enforced, and who should create and implement it. Adoption of a single unifying code of conduct will provide another substantial step forward in supporting equitable, transparent research that supports the decisions that people will soon make about these approaches. Thank you so much for the time today. Feel free to get in touch with me.
Thank you very much. And I'm sure a lot of people are writing down this email address to send their questions to Sarah. So thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Ocean Conservancy, as well, for your help. We heard loud and clear the need for an enforceable research code of conduct. But what also struck me is how difficult it is to verify the carbon dioxide or the carbon removal by ocean CDR techniques. So now we also have an expert here to talk to us about how to ensure durability, verifiability, and additionality. It's good that there's an acronym for that because it's quite hard to say at once for carbon removal effects. So Professor Tom Bell, you're a merit scientist and exchange team lead at the Plymouth Marine Laboratory, our fantastic partners today. And can you tell us a little bit more about those MRV procedures? You have here the remote if you'd like to change the slides.
Excellent, thank you. Oh, does the remote work?
Just tell me the next.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to talk about assessing ocean CDR efficacy. We can move on to the next slide because both yourself and Peter gave excellent introductions to the need. The ocean CDR sector is growing, and this plot on the left-hand side summarizes some of what Peter was talking about. On the y-axis, we have our CO2 emissions, and on the x-axis is a projection into the future. And as has been very well put, there's an urgent need to reduce our CO2 emissions. But as we move into the future, there is this projected need for CDR. And by the time we get to the intersection of the blue line with the red dash line, that's net zero. But by 2100, the projection is that CDR will be a substantial activity on the order of a quarter of our current CO2 emissions. So there is a growing market in response to this, predicted to grow 100-fold by 2050, with legal commitments also expected to drive the creation of a formal market. And so all of this is driving a growth in the ocean CDR sector, with commercial interests rapidly increasing, as well as philanthropic funding sources and government funding coming as they try to realize some of their net zero ambitions and particularly address some of the hard to decarbonize sectors. Next slide, please. However, the likely costs of ocean CDR are hundreds of dollars per ton of CO2, and currently there is no standards or system for assessing the efficacy or the percent efficiency of that CO2 removal from the atmosphere. And so there are a number of questions coming forward from both scientists, industry, and investors that are actually quite similar in certain regards. So is ocean CDR actually an affordable activity? Is it worthy of the investment to remove CO2 from the atmosphere? And then is that expense of activity actually beneficial in terms, does it actually remove the amount of CO2 required or predicted? And is it worthwhile? Does it actually give you a net benefit, or are there costs that make it not worth attempting? And so out of this comes a very strong and quite urgent need for monitoring, reporting, and verification, understanding how much CO2 is being taken out of the atmosphere by such techniques. And this requires scientific consensus about how we go about making those MRV assessments, high-quality protocols that are transparent and independent of the industries that are attempting to achieve CO2 removal from the atmosphere. Next slide, please. And so this schematic shows a number of possible ocean CDR activities. And I think the key point is that the MRV component of this will be very specific to each activity, addressing those questions of additionality, how much additional CO2 is removed from the atmosphere, but also the durability of that removal. How long is that removed from the atmosphere? And drilling down into that, you can start to ask questions of each of these different ocean CDR activities about the carbon intensity of the process. How much CO2 is removed from the atmosphere and how fast is it removed from the atmosphere? But then how long is it then sequestered, maybe in the deep ocean or in geological storage? And then importantly, what are the downstream effects of any of these activities? What are the implications for the natural carbon cycle? But also, what are the unintended consequences, such as production of other greenhouse gases, of which you only have to produce a small amount to have an impact on climate? Next slide, please. So what is clear is that MRV requires a combination of in situ observations and computer models. And we have some very good tools at our disposal, but we will need to adjust these tools to and adjust our existing capabilities in order to apply them to MRV science. And that really is at very early stages. We need to develop our understanding so that we have a really solid understanding of the baseline activity of the ocean carbon cycle. And as part of that, we need to ensure that our ocean time series stations are protected, because they often form our understanding of the baseline. Next slide, please. So, as a community, we urgently need a framework to assess ocean CDR efficacy. This will be of benefit not only to society and to the ocean itself, but also to the various players in ocean CDR in terms of the industry and market. The diversity of this ocean CDR sector is growing rapidly, and we have an opportunity to introduce an MRV framework. I would argue that time is now, but that time is also limited before the industry, I think, will grow to a scale that is then difficult to regulate retrospectively. MRV for the ocean CDR activities is complex and will be approach specific, and the scientific community really requires support and funding, of course, in order to develop MRV framework and robust MRV tools. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Tom. I think we can applaud already. Sorry for the logistics at the back. This is actually not working. See if you. So thank you, Tom. I think it's very clear how rigorous and standardized MRV procedures actually can lay the foundation for precautionary ocean CDR research. So both you and Sarah have actually touched upon those precautionary principles and how they could help prevent the adverse impacts of ocean CDR techniques and how these can actually impact the health of the global ocean and the biodiversity and the communities as well that sustains on the ocean. So now it's also my pleasure to turn to Professor Lisa Levin. You're a distinguished professor at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography. I'm also very proud to say that you're a member of the scientific committee of the Ocean Plateforme, which makes me very happy. You're very famous for all your research into the deep ocean and bringing all of this to us as well. Those of us who haven't had the pleasure of diving and understanding what's happening down the water, basically. So can you tell us a bit more, Lisa, on how ocean CDR techniques can also affect the ocean and those deeper parts of the ocean that we may not know so well?
Okay, are you sure I can't advance my own slides because I have a lot of animation? Otherwise...
I think someone is coming to our rescue. It is turned on.
I'll begin talking. Let's see. Yep. All right. So we've already heard in the last few presentations what the IPCC has told us about the need for active carbon dioxide removal. And really, up until recently, most of the efforts to look at this have been terrestrial. But now the ocean is clearly a focus. And believe it or not, there are already many, many different technologies being tested around the world, or at least studied in the ocean, different parts of the ocean. We all know we only have one ocean. That ocean is critical for the health of the planet. That ocean is highly interconnected and very sensitive to human perturbations. And the organisms that live in that ocean don't actually see the governance jurisdictions that I've put up there. They don't know the difference between EEZs and areas beyond national jurisdiction. So I'm going to focus on the high seas and the deep sea, and just want to remind everybody that these areas provide many ecosystem services. They provide regulating services in the form of carbon cycling and nutrient regeneration. They provide provisioning services in the form of fisheries, energy, increasingly genetic resources. They provide important cultural services for the arts, for spiritual values, and much more. They are the place our communication cables sit. And we're looking now at a new service. using the ocean as the repository for our unwanted carbon. So it's not surprising when people ask, where do we put the carbon we need to remove, that the answer has come to be the deep ocean. The deep ocean is already the largest carbon repository. And we know from modeling that waters below 1,000 meters are the place we can put that carbon to stay out of the atmosphere for anywhere from 100 to maybe 200 years or more, depending on which part of the ocean we deposit it in. And I want to just briefly review the three main categories of carbon dioxide removal that are being considered now. One involves enhancing primary production, for example, of phytoplankton through iron fertilization or artificial upwelling, or culturing macroalgae, because the photosynthesis carried out removes carbon dioxide, and the ultimate intent is for all of these organic forms to sink into the deep ocean. A second major category is to dispose of carbon dioxide from land, or carbon from land into the deep sea, and it's been proposed to place crop waste or wood waste from land into the deep ocean, and also to inject liquid CO2 captured from industry on land and to pipe it into either the midwater or the seafloor surface or even the subsurface. And the third category involves ocean alkalinity enhancement, which would allow the ocean to take up more carbon dioxide, and this would be through the addition of carbonates or silicates or through electrochemical processes. But all of these technologies are in early stages of testing and verification, and at present remain unproven, and all of them could have negative consequences for ocean biodiversity. We know that these technologies will impact ocean physics, chemistry, and biology. For example, though several of them will reduce light and productivity and increase turbidity, which is suspended particles, ocean alkalinity enhancement will release potentially toxic trace metals. We know that stimulation of phytoplankton blooms will, as the phytoplankton sink and decay, will lead to oxygen depletion and carbon dioxide enhancement, essentially making mini oxygen minimum zones under the areas. And all of these factors will affect the vertical migrations of the billions of organisms that move carbon from the surface down into the deep ocean. We know the sinking of crop waste and macroalgae can release dissolved organic carbon, and it will change the microbial communities. All of these will sink to the seafloor and alter the food supply of organisms. It will change species interactions. And at scale, it will smother massive areas of seafloor, creating anoxia, possibly releasing hydrogen sulfide and other greenhouse gases. And then piping liquid CO2 into the deep ocean is essentially ocean acidification. It causes hypercapnia and smothering of organisms. So really, the carbon services that are provided by the biological pump, fish, mammals, and benthos are highly vulnerable to the many CDR technologies that have been proposed. All of these organisms are fundamental to removal, transport, transformation, sequestration, and burial of carbon in the ocean, and we have to be very careful our technologies don't threaten these. We also need to strengthen the governance of these activities, and right now the London Convention and Protocol is the organization, the UN body most likely to regulate these activities, but it's worth pointing out that scientific groups reporting to the Convention and Protocol have noted the potential of a number of these technologies to cause deleterious effects that are widespread, long-lasting, or severe, and that there's considerable uncertainty regarding the effects on the marine environment, human health, and other uses of the ocean. So my final message, I'd like to come come to the global stocktake and point out that while ocean climate actions can serve as a part of the solution for climate change mitigation and adaptation, I believe we need to be focusing on protecting the blue carbon ecosystems and their existing climate services. We need to, of course, be amplifying ocean-based renewable energy, but also act to harmonize ocean activities from shipping, fishing, biodiversity conservation, mining, waste dumping, whatever it is, with our climate goals. And when it comes to CDR, I think we need to invoke the precautionary principle and slow down a little bit and proceed with caution. Thank you. Oh, and I want to leave you with my favorite, a beautiful video of blue carbon in action.
Thank you so much, Lisa, and echoing Peter's words as well. You've reminded us of how transboundary the ocean is, and when we know that ocean governance is already so fragmented, I think that now it's even clearer that the governance frameworks that we rely on to protect ocean health were not really written with the approach of ocean CDR in mind. So I think it's also an extremely important part of this discussion is to better understand those governance gaps and how we can improve them and overcome them. And to shed light on this, it's my pleasure to call on Dr. Ramakrishna. You're the Director on Ocean and Climate Policy at the Woods Oceanographic Institution. Please, Rama, share your wisdom with us.
Excellent. Thank you, Lorelei, and I want to thank you for your moderation, and Thekla, I don't see her here, but, oh, there she is, for arranging this wonderful panel. A round of applause for her. What I would like to do, you would notice, first of all, that I'm not an oceanographer. I don't have any slides to share with you. I'm an international lawyer by training. And what I want to do is really talk about, highlight the fact that we are meeting in the context of negotiations and the number of parties that are here interested in this topic. And so the fact that we're addressing it here is very appropriate. And more importantly, starting with Ambassador Peter Thomson to all the other panelists, talked about the governance aspects of it, because it is central to everything that we are trying to address here. I had spent practically my entire adult life either in drafting agreements or talking about implementation of those agreements at the national level, working with scientists in all these processes, whether it is IPCC or otherwise. And I'm more convinced than ever that we need to find solutions wherever they may exist in terms of addressing the climate problem. We have had very little success in reducing our emissions into the atmosphere in 30 years of negotiations. They continue to raise, and excepting for the period during the COVID, we did not have any reduction to talk about. And looking at other options, as Ambassador Thomson talked about, is not, and I repeat, is not giving up on what we must do, which is continue to reduce emissions and move away from our reliance on fossil fuels. Not only the panelists here, but the sponsoring institutions have been at work in understanding what marine or ocean CDR is about. In fact, one of my colleagues, Ken Bissler, has been at it for the past 25 years and has been producing papers on that. And in fact, he has created what is called Exploring Ocean Iron Solutions. And I want to bring to you the fact that there were about 35 scientists that were brought together at the Moss Landing Marine Laboratory in California to look at this issue in some great detail. The question is not that we know everything that we need to know. We don't. But the idea here is to start the process in a manner where it is not just one scientific institution, one part of the world doing their own thing, but in a collaborative manner, in a transparent manner, work together to understand what are the issues involved. What do we need to know? And many of the points that Lisa talked about are absolutely vital. And one of the key points that I want to highlight is where she said could have negative consequences, and I totally agree with it. But we are going through, as again Ambassador Thomson had said, many of those negative consequences because of the climate warming and the impact that they have on ocean ecosystems. So we need to be mindful of that. The point that I want to highlight also is in the context of ocean governance and in the context of monitoring, reporting, and verification that Tom had talked about. There are two things that we want to talk about. One is, as scientists, when you carry out these experiments, the MRV there refers to how do you measure and monitor the actual impact, not just in terms of impacts on carbon sequestration, but also on the marine environment. And we want to have as thorough a knowledge and appreciation of it as it's possible. But in the context of negotiations and in the context of what countries might say that they are trying to do, would like to do, have done, whether it is in the context of the NDCs or NAPs, we need a methodology. We need a system to correctly understand the actual impact that these actions have in reducing emissions. That is absolutely vital. And we don't have that system yet. We don't have many countries reporting on these things, which itself needs to be corrected. But when they do report, what are they reporting on? Is country A the same as country B? And if we don't have that, we don't have a common baseline, we don't have a method, a way of including that in the context of any emerging market that there might be on this point. The key central point that I want to draw your attention to is that we are still at a stage where we are exploring various options. And as others have pointed out, there is a great deal of potential, but the potential comes with risks as well. But when we think about the risks, I would also want to highlight the fact that not doing anything is not an option, because then that's going to have several risks on the marine environment as well. And so we need to be mindful of that. The second point, and this is probably the last point I want to make, is about the London Dumping Convention that Lisa talked about, and the BBNJ agreement, or the High Seas agreement that she referred to. We are in a situation, and I think the point that you made is absolutely right on, in terms of one ocean, and that these boundaries that we have, whether it is territorial waters or exclusive economic zone or the high seas, that is a construct that we have placed artificially on the oceans, but that is not how the marine environment operates. So we need to have a system that really understands the interactions between all these various levels, and we don't yet have it. The UNCLOS, the United Nations Convention on Law of the Sea, adopted in 1982, obviously did not factor in climate. The Climate Convention from 92 onwards to the Paris Agreement did not. There is a mention of oceans, but not much. And so we're trying to fix that system. And now to think that, well, either IMO is the sole proprietary concern or the High Seas Agreement doesn't really get us to where we need to be in terms of what we have to do under the Climate Convention and the Paris Agreement in keeping the temperature increase to below 2 degrees Celsius. And that is the vital part of it. And we have now developed this Ocean Climate Dialogue, and we have now, here as a group, talking about these things. Now we have an Ocean Pavilion, again, with all these partners, bringing these issues to the central attention, but we still need to do more. We need to do more in terms of the conflicting jurisdictions, and the agreements that we have are not doing what we must do. And I heartily endorse what Ambassador Thomson had said about the need for something like a commission to look at these issues, the need for IPCC to come up with a methodology on what countries must report or how they must report on their NDCs and NAPs. And we need a properly reliable system that whatever that we're trying to do in the name of marine CDR is in fact keeping the carbon in the water without doing any undue damage. So the code of conduct that we talked about is vital, but then these other things that I talked about, whether it is in the context of the IPCC or incorporated so that in the GST and the Commission, are the ways to move forward. Thank you, Lorelei.
Thank you very much, Rama. I'm sure questions are piling up, so we'll get there very soon. Thank you, Rama. And in the spirit of doing more as well, one of the key questions about developing robust governance and robust research with regards to ocean CDR is also the potential impacts on ocean-dependent communities and how can we ensure that they are protected as well from the negative impacts of CDR. So we have the honor of having Professor Lisa L.Graumlich, you're the president of the American Geophysical Union. You've been working to make sure that equity and justice are an integral part of this discussion. So please, Lisa, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. In the 1990s, I taught one of the first very large undergraduate classes, on global climate change in the United States. I presented what we understood at that time about the global carbon cycle, and I showed people graphs and data that said that about 30% of human-caused carbon emissions were absorbed by the ocean. And I looked at those students, stared them in the eye, and I said, this was incredibly good news, because it was going to give us time to transition to a fossil fuel economy in the coming decade. That was 30 years ago. So what we know has happened since then is that we did benefit from some of that good news. About 95% of the excess heat energy that was trapped since the 1970s has been absorbed into the oceans. That has slowed down global warming. And the oceans continue to absorb CO2, and as a result, ocean surface waters have become about 30% more acidic over the last 150 years. We passively let the ocean buy us time, and we paid a price. And this is true in so many ways. For me, ocean acidification has a real local effect. Here in Washington State, where I live, coastal ocean beds have begun to decline, bringing hardship to local communities and threatening a traditional food source of native tribal nations. Washington State is not unique. More than 3 billion people in the world rely on seafood. So the oceans are a global common resource for the climate system, for biodiversity, for food security. And we are now asking the oceans to do even more to protect our common future. We believe that CDR may buy us more time in meeting the Paris targets and beyond. But how much time can we buy? At what price? And importantly, who decides? So as president of AGU, I am honored to be part of this panel. It's an opportunity to share with you how we are addressing this last question. How do we make decisions about research and implementation of CDR in ways that are scientifically robust and ethical? So in the remaining brief time, I'm going to talk to you about what is our vision, what are our principles, and how does environmental justice fit in. You'll see on the slides our vision statement for an ethical framework for climate intervention research, experimentation, and deployment. And what we see is that the full range of climate innovation research is guided by ethical standards, principles, and practices. These ethical standards are globally applicable with concrete local and regional use. And our concurrent efforts to reduce emissions are not diminished in any way by the climate innovation research. This vision is something that has been shared by others in this panel. We are aided and greatly supported by the Ethical Framework Advisory Committee. Besides noticing that there's a lot of very small pictures of people, and you probably can't read their names, but one of the points is that the AGU is convening and facilitating this. We do not see ourselves as governing the ethical framework. And this board draws from a broad range of scholars that are ethicists, political scientists, economists, as well as people in civil society. This is not just the scientific community. We are supported, though, by the American Geophysical Union, which was founded over 100 years ago as the world's largest earth and space science professional organization. So, under the guidance of the advisory board and with the input of that broad range of stakeholders and partners, we've developed a set of core principles. We seek to ensure that research about strategies is inclusive, representative, and just, does not make deployment inevitable, and does not undermine efforts to reduce carbon emissions. And we seek to assure that public participation is very active in the development of the decision-making processes. At its core, this agreement is that any party that is pursuing carbon removal or sequestration and storage at scales of all types should abide by recognized ethical processes for climate intervention, research, and deployment. This is not a rigid protocol. This is adaptive and evolving, and once again, AGU is neutral in its stance on this. So, when we say inclusion and justice, what do we actually mean? We often use that word without actually thinking through who that implies is at the table. So with distributive justice, who is benefited and who's harmed? With procedural justice, who decides and how will geoengineering decisions be made? I actually think an incredibly important point is that third one, which is how do we balance the local right of refusal with the global impact of that refusal? And finally, I just want to point to the so-called slippery slope and moral hazard hypotheses, suggesting that engagement in climate intervention inevitably leads to deployment, and this in turn undermines commitments to reduce emissions. We need your help. Okay, I want to see people getting their phone up there and scanning that. I'm not going to move to my last slide until you do that. If you're not a scanner, there's bit.ly/ethical_framework. Clock's ticking. We want your feedback by August 15th. We're serious. We really do want your feedback. Okay. Thank you. You did that. Okay, my last slide, my last comments. Increasingly, the role of CDR, as it's embedded in this larger question of climate intervention, has moved into the spotlight. When things are urgent, when things are contentious, it's easy to lose sight of the complexity of the questions we are asking and the options we're weighing. So on behalf of the community that is wrestling with the development of an ethical framework, I urge you to help us to bring together the scientific knowledge and the awareness of the human face of this issue. We need strong governance, and that requires working together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lisa, for your excellent presentation. You made it very clear that if we are to pursue ocean CDR, it has to be in an informed and equitable manner, and that has to be guided by the principles of free, prior, and informed consent. So thank you so much. Thank you for the first part of this discussion. We've heard about these uncertainties, these risks about ocean CDR, and about the safeguards that could be implemented and developed to overcome these challenges. Most notably adopting an enforceable research of conducts for ocean CDR, establishing rigorous and standardized MRV procedures, developing national and international governance frameworks, as well as placing environmental justice at the heart of ocean CDR. So before we open for questions, it's time to bring on the big guns. It's time to bring on the policy nerds and link all of these important discussions with the context that we're in today.
Don't call me a big gun.
So we have the pleasure of having the infamous Dr. Joanna Poss with us, the team lead at the UNFCCC Secretariat for the Ocean, the architect behind the Ocean and Climate Change Dialogue, the ones that actually looks for the word ocean in the global stocktake technical dialogues. Joanna, thank you so much for taking some time to be with us today. And please, how can you loop all of this with the global stocktake and what's happening here at the SB58? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lorelei. How can I speak after that introduction? Okay, I haven't got any slides, but I'm going to bring on some audience participation. We've just had the last technical dialogue of the global stocktake. So I'm not including this last week in my conversation because I haven't been fast enough in keeping up with it last week. But I would like to you all to raise a hand if you think that the ocean was mentioned in the GST technical dialogues 1 and 2. Was it mentioned at all? Yes? Yes or no? Okay. Oh, that's not very optimistic already. I was gonna go into how many times it had been mentioned in the GST, but obviously you're very pessimistic. Okay, how many times has ocean CDR been mentioned in the global stocktake? Marine knows these answers here. Okay, so anybody think that it's been mentioned in the global stocktake at all? Yes? No? Yes? Once this last week. Once. Ocean CDR was mentioned last week by, I think, the EU, if I don't know. Anyway, mentioned once. And actually, in GST Technical Dialogue 1 and 2, the number of times that the word ocean has come up in those reports is, and we counted them, 23. And those are 90-page reports. So I have 3 points and a wish at the end. My first point is we're dealing a little bit here with an oxymoron, and we're asking not whether ocean is in the GST, but why isn't it? And the oxymoron is that the UNFCCC is a party-driven process, but the ocean, as we all know, is beyond national borders. And also, why is the ocean not mentioned in the GST? Especially because in some ways it is national borders. There is an EEZ. So it's been really missing in some of these conversations, quite seriously missing, considering that we've had the SROC report, considering we've had the AR6. There were 2 mentions of sea level rise in the first GST technical dialogue report of 90 pages, which is an existential crisis affecting many low-lying states, most of the small island states, particularly atoll islands. It's a cycle between the cryospheric melt, the expansion of water, and yet sea level rise has been mentioned 2 times. There's a little bit more on the illustrations in the foyer. I recommend you go and have a look at those. Cryosphere was mentioned 0 times in the first 2 technical dialogues. It's come up recently. So it really is a question of why is ocean not in there and what are we going to do about it? So that's my first point. The other point is that within my first point, climate change is impacting the ocean very, very seriously, as we all know. But there seems to be a real missing of this conversation, even in the impacts of climate change on our global planet. And we're talking about global goals in the Paris Agreement. We're talking about global goal on temperature, a global goal on mitigation, a global goal on adaptation. So those global goals are really missing ocean in those conversations. And also, of course, the CDR, the removal part, comes into 4.1. 4.1 is on mitigation. It's about the need for reduction and removal of carbon dioxide and greenhouse gases from the atmosphere as fast as possible to reach peaking before we reach global zero net zero in 2050. So that's my first point. Second point, and I think we've heard a lot from our colleagues, science. We need desperately observation, research, coordinated climate services, because we're not just talking about impacts on the ocean, we're talking about what the ocean can do for you and what it can do for parties. We need all of that in order to parties, countries, people can act in the ocean space. Mitigation, adaptation, Article 6 is causing some interesting conversations. The CDR is all part of that conversation. We need coordinated global knowledge exchange with all knowledge holders. We've heard of some of that from the panel. And that conversation needs to be also with indigenous peoples, local communities, so that maladaptation in that context is avoided. And CDR is also in that conversation. And we all know about the advances in data management, analysis, AI, that need to be used in this new area of dealing with this tsunami of data that we're getting from the ocean space. So first point, oxymoron and what and why ocean is not in the GST. Second point, science. Third point, ambition. The NDC Synthesis Report 2022 identified that 40% of parties are targeting ocean-based climate action, but only 26% of those parties have any ocean-based climate target, policy, or measure. So ocean-related measures reported in NDCs relate more often to adaptation than to mitigation. So ambition must be coordinated, but it must be coordinated. It's a complicated space. It must be coordinated with climate-resilient marine spatial planning within national borders. That's where the UNFCCC sits, but very conscious of the interconnectedness of the ocean and the many international agreements that parties must respond to in this space. So it's complicated, but we need to work within that complexity. I'll give you an example. The Global Goal and Adaptation conversation next month is really talking about interconnectedness between other multilateral agreements. So I encourage everybody in the ocean space to look at the GGA conversation. Ocean came up in the workshop in COP around reporting around GGA, and but it's been it again needs to come in more strongly, and this connection between international agreements is really important in the context of the global goal on adaptation. So we've got the oxymoron, we've got the need to bring more into the the ocean is missing from the GST. We've got the science, we've got the ambition. So where do we go from here? Where do we want to be at the next GST in 5 years' time? I think what we need to message about is that because there's, in fact, the GST is the big thing that's coming up to COP this year, but it's about recognizing what's missing, not just what's actually being talked about. And I think that is a very important message to COP from the ocean community this year. A shout out this year as loud as possible, ocean climate action is an underutilized opportunity to build climate ambition and reach Paris goals. The high level panel already talked about the opportunity for 20% of mitigation possibilities to come from ocean-based action. Some of that includes CDR. So this really should be a key outcome, I think, of GST decisions, as well as the other decisions, such as those around the global goal and adaptation. This interconnectivity between biodiversity, obviously beyond national jurisdiction, and the biodiversity within national jurisdiction, and so on. So I have three points for where we go from here. That's the first one. Second one, based off of the GST, of course, the Paris Agreement asks parties to increase ambition, the shall clause for ambition within the Paris Agreement. So if we have currently, let's check my numbers, it's been a busy couple of weeks, 40% of parties currently have some ocean-based actions, and some of those are very small. So second point, in revised NDCs, 100% NDCs have not just coastal ocean-related action, but countries aim towards 100% coastal ocean-related legal instruments related to climate, ocean, biodiversity nexus. And third point, the next GST, and I think, I'm sorry, Peter, I missed your talk at the beginning, but I think we're agreeing on this one. I encourage the importance of a state of ocean action report as inputs into the next GST, and hopefully by then a coordinated governance system to get us there. And with that, I will pass back to Lorelei. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Phil. Thank you very much for enlightening us a little bit on how this works. And I think it's important for all of us here when we talk to our constituencies, when we talk to our parties, when we talk among non-state actors on how we drive momentum, how we drive action as we enter into the political phase of the global stocktake. We need to ensure that the conclusions and recommendations of the GST include nature-based solutions, include the ocean climate action. We have a portfolio of scientifically proven ocean-based climate solutions, and we need to scale them up. And despite what's happening in negotiations this week, we need to make sure that the GST is ambitious and actually calls for recommendations that will help intern parties to improve their updated NDCs and take into account all this range of opportunities. So now we have time for a couple of questions. That was short. Okay, so Mr. You were the first one to raise your... I'll give you my mic, but I'll need it back.
Yeah, thank you very much. Axel Michaelova from the University of Zurich and Perspectives Climate Research, and engaged in a project called CDR Poet, CDR Politics and Ethics. My question to the panel would relate, we see more and more what I would call carbon mavericks, or maybe even carbon pirates, trying to find opportunities in the oceans for CDR, setting up commercial aspects and not really considering the governance frameworks. What would be your view of trying to prevent a repetition what we had in the 2000s with this fertilization experiment on the Canadian West Coast that, of course, somehow stopped the debate and poisoned it. So how can we prevent a recurrence of that?
We'll take a couple more and then we'll give the floor back to the panel we had. Okay, I think, hold on.
Hello, I'm Dana. I'm the founder of EcoSpectrum, which is the first Oregon soon-to-be mobile application aiming to elevate climate and ocean literacy for youth on the spectrum. And this question was directed at Dr. Kiripati. You mentioned UNCLOS and how we need a system to consider the interactions in marine life and terrestrial as well. You mentioned that you're also an international lawyer, and I study law and politics as well at the University of Glasgow. And one question that I'm curious to know your opinion on is how does a system that is considerate of the interactions between marine species and areas within and beyond national jurisdictions look like legally? How can we protect marine species through holding states accountable legally, given the movement of those species from areas that are within national jurisdictions to other areas? Is this a potential possibility? Can we do this? I know the question is difficult because we don't protect our marine species in areas beyond national jurisdictions enough anyway, but I'd still love to hear your views.
We have two more questions from here. I will ask you to keep it brief so we can give the panel a chance to respond. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I am Silvia Ribeiro. I am from ETC Group. And I would like to ask, I would like to thank you for your inputs. And I also agree that the ocean is extremely important in the GST. I would like to say that if there are not carbon dioxide removals in the GST, maybe it's because these are unexistent technologies that has a lot of risks and has not been tested anywhere. And where they were tested, they were immediately stopped either by the by the London Convention or the Convention on Biological Diversity. But I have a very touched question here, which is that in the Convention on Biological Diversity issued a moratorium on ocean fertilization because of the impacts and because of the lack of governance and because the potential impacts on biodiversity. But it also says in the decision 916 of the CBD, of the Convention on Biological Diversity, that it shouldn't be used to generate carbon credits. And the issue to say that, and the rationale behind that was that as soon as this became a commercial activity, it will invade the oceans with a lot of different activities commercially and for profit. And that is what we are looking at.
Can you get to the question? We have 5 minutes left.
That is the question. So my question is, why are we considering here in the Climate Convention commercial for-profit activities to be the source for carbon credits when there are other parts of United Nations that recommend opposite to that?
Thank you. Please, 1 minute, and then we have to...
Yes, thank you. Marko Reinikainen from Climate Action Network Europe. This is more like a comment, but maybe I can have a comment back. So there's about 6 years left of the remaining carbon dioxide budget, and everybody seems to agree that we don't know yet if these techniques will be efficient enough, if they are affordable, and above all, if they are risk-free enough. So for me, it's a no-brainer. For me, it looks like if the current measures to replace fossil fuels with renewables, if the pace isn't fast enough, it needs to be ramped up. That would be the solution for me. Let me just shortly quote here from The Guardian, Rebecca Solnit, who says, "We know what to do, we have the solutions, we need to do it, so the biggest problems are political." Thank you, sorry.
Thank you so much. Please, from the panel, just start responding, please, so we have to move a little bit faster. Who wants to go first?
Do you want to go first, because there was a question that was specific?
I would answer it more broadly than specifically to the question that you asked. We have mastered the technique of operating in silos. We need to really reach across, and we have what I refer to as jurisdictional conflicts. We have several international agreements that don't seem to factor in the impact of what other agreements are trying to address in each of these things. And so the situation with the High Seas Treaty, the BBNJ agreement that we're talking about, is the same as that they did not. This is a treaty that is just going to be signed in few days, but they did not factor in the impacts of climate on biodiversity. Joe is talking about GST and how many times we factored in the ocean. It's the same story time and again. So we need to look at this in a holistic manner and to understand exactly what we need to do. And it's only then we would be able to move forward. But I'd be happy to speak with you afterwards in greater detail. Thank you.
Thank you, Rama. In the interest of time, I just suggest that each of the speakers provide some answers to what you've heard from the questions, and then we'll give the floor to Vladimir for closing remarks. Do you want to start?
So yeah, I'll address the first question. I think that's actually the point, is that this sort of stuff is going to happen. There are millions of dollars being invested in companies that want to do ocean CDR, and it's beholden on all of us to get engaged with that, to get a framework in place to help to regulate it, to help to limit carbon pirates, as you call them.
I'll take the question about legal protection for marine species across borders. I mean, we do have fish stocks agreement. We do have some vehicles that look at this question, but we need to be bringing, as Rama said, all the different UN bodies together that deal with biodiversity and have them talk to the climate negotiators and basically make sure everybody's understands the issues and is on the same page about how to be biodiversity positive and climate positive at the same time.
And I want to speak, Mayan. Thank you, Rama. I want to speak to this question about the urgency with respect to carbon mavericks, as it was described. In working with AGU on the ethical framework, we are torn between that sense of urgency and the need for careful consultative deliberation. And really, it's a dial we're turning. And once again, urge you as a community to give us your feedback about how to make that balance. And then also want to look forward to the fact that as governing principles come forward, they will be operating at local, national, global scales. And all that we do within our homes and the places that we live, as well as in bodies like the UNFCCC, to try to integrate and marry those different levels of governance will be critical.
Thank you, Lisa. Joe, do you want to add something? You good? You good? Bref. Thank you very much. A big round of applause for our amazing panel. And now the easiest task of them all is to provide the closing remarks. Excellency V.Ryabinin, the Executive Secretary of the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission of UNESCO. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Lorelei. Tekla, Plymouth Marine Laboratory. If I only had to do this, that would be easy. But indeed, you know, the situation is really very serious. And I would like to say that we need to be philosophical and scientific in this approach. And for my first reaction is that, you know, that our civilization is basically kind of, you know, a volume that is working in the conditions of physical laws, including the growth of entropy, and because of that, we have to move our problems in space and time. So we're moving them ahead of time, trying to, at the same time, speaking about sustainable development. We are moving them also in space, for example, now in the ocean. So indeed, I was participating in, together with Peter Schlosser, that was part of your group, in the setup of the SOLAS project. And in this project, it became clear that iron fertilization was not only creating problems, but we couldn't understand how the ecosystem was working. That was why the London Protocol and Convention were amended to stop those field experiments. Then I would like to also quote from Alan Robock, that was also on your group, Lisa. So Alan Robock wrote several papers that were related to the ethics of geoengineering, because we were studying at the same time serum addition to stratospheric clouds, and there were there was some assessment of positive and negative impacts of geoengineering in that area, and actually most of them were negative. So the situation has significantly changed since then, because what I'm describing was happening in the first decade of the century. Now in 2015 we had Paris Agreement, then we have also some other agreements. So in terms of legislation we are moving forward, but the current situation of course is very, very bad. What also happened in the world, and you know, I have to say I do it very kind of responsibly, because you know, what I see is to some extent some inflation of ethics at the highest echelons of power. And this leads to many geopolitical issues, the wars, and some other things. So in that situation, there is actually a larger danger that the current hype that exists in the business community may result in uncontrolled and irresponsible actions when it comes to different environmental solutions. So I really applaud AGU for that assessment. I have to say that in the previous assessments of the ethics of the geoengineering and impact on the environment, deliberate impact on the environment, it was clearly stated that in current state of knowledge, the theoretical studies of geoengineering are ethical, but field in situ studies are not ethical. That was clear formulation that came also from Alan Robock. So based on what AGU did, I think UNESCO is now going to start an assessment of the ethics of engineering, climate and geoengineering. This is going to happen soon, and I will push in UNESCO for this to happen. Indeed, we need to make sure that this is not a market-oriented activity. This is really governmental-oriented activity. That is not. It's like in medicine, you know. The situation is that we have to cure the patient, and this is not a reason for extract more money from the patient. So I would like also to say that definitely, and I already saw it in the AGU approach, this will be south, north, south, south, south approach. That is very, very important. Then also, we shouldn't abstain from anthropocentric approach to this. There must be some representatives of those fishes that do not understand how Earth is governed. So then also, I don't think that ocean carbon dioxide reduction or removal should be considered in isolation from other ways of addressing climate issue, other ways of managing the ocean. There are very significant approaches there, so it has to be only considered in that way. So indeed, I have to say there is significant advantage and significant potential in managing the ocean, including for carbon smart ways, and there are some climate smart ways of maritime special planning that are evolving. And I think there will be a big conference on United Nations on the Ocean 2025 in Nice. So this has to be discussed from ethical grounds, from the United Nations grounds. And I truly believe that United Nations should come up with the plan of working in the ocean for the sake of many conventions, because you know what is happening now with this High Seas Treaty, Montreal Biodiversity Framework, the Paris Agreement. You know, it's like the situation is, I formulated in the following way. There is ocean is sick and with multiple diseases, and it has multiple doctors that treat those diseases without speaking to each other. Yeah. We need to cure the patient, not treat the disease. That's the difference. And I think we can really do this. And there is a possibility actually of mentally, intellectually embracing the complexity of the problem. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vladimir. I've been a poor timekeeper with 3 minutes overboard, so I would like to thank very much all of the organizers, as well as Tekla and Marine for helping us in setting all of this up. This is the beginning of the discussion, so thank you very much. Oh, and group picture. Family picture for the speakers, please.
Adopted now. It's not even adopted yet. Will be adopted.